I've been married to Lisa for about 8 years now. When we first got together, I thought she was perfect, beautiful, confident, sharp-tongued, but charming, and she always said she was fiercely loyal. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but I never doubted her loyalty until recently. Slowly, little things started to change. She became more defensive, especially when I asked about her whereabouts or why she was staying late at work. She'd brush it off with a sharp comment about how I was being paranoid or insecure. I didn't push, part of me just wanted to believe she was busy or stressed, and maybe I was overthinking it. Then came the subtle signs that something was off. She started hiding her phone more, always taking calls in private, even when we were out or at home. She'd get tense if I tried to look at her screen, and her excuses, "It's just work stuff," or "a friend needing advice," began to sound flimsy. I'd catch her in little lies too, like about who she was texting or where she was going, but I didn't have concrete proof yet. Still, I felt the distance growing, and a gnawing suspicion was taking root. The real turning point was when I noticed her phone had a new number saved under a strange name, something that didn't match any of her contacts from her usual circle. I didn't have a reason to look, but I did. I sneaked a peek when she was in the shower. What I saw made my stomach drop. There were messages, explicit and frequent, between her and a researcher I'd never heard of before, Dr. Jason Reed. He was part of the team working on a genetic research project that involved our family. Our children have a rare hereditary condition, one that Lisa and I have been trying to understand and manage for years. That's why I was so invested in this research, because it's about our kids' future health. Reading those messages, I realized she'd been lying all along about working late or going out with friends. She was seeing him, obviously. The language was flirtatious, sometimes even intimate. She told him things she'd never told me and asked about his personal life, which was just disgusting. The worst part, I saw evidence that she had visited him in his lab, and from the tone of her texts, it was more than just professional. It hit me like a train. All those nights I was worried about her being distant, about her sneaking around. She was actually with someone else. Someone who didn't care about us or our family. Someone who was analyzing our DNA, probably manipulating data, possibly even extending the timeline for some reason. Something I later found out was connected to her lying about her research timeline, which was suspicious enough. It was more than just infidelity. It was betrayal of everything I believed in. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was racing with anger, hurt, and the sick feeling that everything I thought I knew about her was a lie. I kept asking myself how she could do this, how she could lie and cheat knowing what was at stake, knowing how much our children's health depends on her research and her honesty. I knew I couldn't just ignore it anymore. I had to confront her, but I didn't know how. I felt like my entire world was crumbling, and the worst part was, I didn't even have all the answers yet. The next morning was a blur. I woke up feeling numb but with a burning need to get answers. I decided I couldn't just sit on this anymore, so I waited until Lisa left for her doctor's appointment, which I knew was just an excuse to meet Jason. I took her phone, carefully, so I wouldn't wake her up. I had to see everything, and I needed to be sure. It was a mess of messages, photos, and emails, enough to make me sick. One thing that stood out was a scheduled meeting, an actual face-to-face in Jason's lab, which she texted him about as if it was just another day. I felt my stomach twist. She was lying to me about so much. I kept asking myself how I could have missed it, how I didn't see the signs earlier. It was right in front of me, and I'd been stupidly blind. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew I had to do this carefully. I didn't want to blow everything up without knowing exactly how deep this went. I also didn't want her to know I had been snooping, at least not yet. I needed to gather my evidence, keep my cool, and plan my next move. When she finally came back, I was already sitting on the couch pretending to be normal. She looked tense, but she smiled falsely and came over. I could tell she knew I was upset, but she played innocent. "Hey honey, everything okay?" she asked, her voice a little too sweet, a little too fake. I looked at her and just said, "We need to talk, now." Her eyes flickered with something, defiance, fear. I wasn't sure. She tried to brush me off, but I didn't let her. I laid it all out on the table, her texts, the schedule, the visit to Jason's lab. Her face went pale, then red with anger. "That's all lies," she spat. "You're crazy, you're paranoid. I don't know why you're making a big deal out of nothing." She started lying again, throwing out excuses about work stress, how Jason was a colleague who was helping her with the research, that they were just friends. I didn't believe her for a second. I felt every ounce of my trust evaporate. My mind was racing. How could she do this? How could she betray me and our children, especially over this research? It wasn't just about her cheating. It was about the manipulation of data, the deception about her work, maybe even the delay in our children's treatment. The thought made my stomach churn. I told her I knew everything, that I had seen enough, and I was done. Her reaction was classic, defensive, angry, trying to turn it around on me. She called me paranoid, jealous, insecure, said I was overreacting and that I was ruining everything because I couldn't handle the truth. But I knew the truth, her truth, and I wasn't going to pretend anymore. I was furious at her lies, sickened by her betrayal, and heartbroken that she could be so reckless with everything we had built. That night, I felt crushed. I'd always thought we were solid, that she loved me and wanted a future with our kids. Turns out, her future was with Jason, and she didn't see the damage she was doing. I couldn't sleep, replaying every moment of the last few weeks, trying to understand how it all collapsed so fast. I kept asking myself if I could forgive her, if we could fix this, or if I had to walk away. But deep down, I knew the betrayal ran too deep. My trust was shattered. I was left with nothing but questions and a crushing sense of loss. The days that followed were a whirlwind. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't sleep, and everything around me seemed dull and gray. Every time I saw her, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. Lisa's attitude didn't improve. She kept insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that I was blowing things out of proportion. She called me jealous, insecure, even paranoid. But I wasn't stupid. I knew what I saw, and I knew what it meant. I just didn't want to accept it yet. The thing that broke me the most was realizing how much she lied from the start. She kept telling me her work was just about the family's genetic condition, how she was doing her best to help our kids. But then I found out she'd been manipulating data from the clinical trial, probably extending the research timeline so she could spend more time with Jason. That was the real reason she was working late. She'd taken shortcuts that could jeopardize our children's health, all for her own convenience and maybe even her affair. I started digging into the research data myself. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't help it. I wanted to understand how deep the deception went. I got access to some of the lab reports, the raw data, and I saw inconsistencies, things that didn't add up. Some results had been altered, timelines pushed back, and the genetic markers we care about weren't being accurately represented anymore. It was all a mess, and I realized she'd been lying about her progress, probably covering her tracks because of Jason. One night I found myself sitting in the dark, staring at her phone again. I thought about calling Jason, but I knew I shouldn't. Instead, I decided I needed to hear it from her directly. I wanted her to admit everything. I set a trap waiting for her to come home late from her book club, and I recorded her when she thought I was asleep. She slipped her phone out of her pocket and started to talk. The words that spilled from her were a mixture of arrogance, dismissiveness, and blatant lies. She was talking about how she needed Jason's help to keep the research going, how she was tired of my accusations, and how I was just a jealous husband. Hearing her speak so casually about her betrayal made me feel sick. She said she didn't want to ruin everything but was doing this for us, for the kids. It was the classic excuse, but I knew better. I knew her real reason was her affair and her manipulation of the data. The way she talked about Jason like he was some kind of hero who was making her life easier made the fury inside me boil over. I realized I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I confronted her the next day with everything I'd found. I played the recording and laid out the evidence. Her face twisted into anger. She denied everything, called me paranoid and jealous again, said I was twisting her words. She spun stories about how I was being unreasonable, how I didn't understand the pressure she was under. But I'd had enough. I knew she was lying, and I could see she was trying to gaslight me into backing down. That moment was one of the hardest in my life. I felt a mix of heartbreak, rage, and helplessness. I wanted to shake her, to make her see what she was doing, how she was risking everything, including our kids' health, just for her own selfish needs. I realized that her idea of helping was just covering her own tracks. The woman I loved and trusted had become someone I barely recognized. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was destroying the foundation of our family, manipulating her work, and endangering the future of our children. It was a wake-up call I couldn't ignore anymore. After I laid everything out on the table, her reaction was predictable but still gut-wrenching. She spun the story even more, trying to make me look like the villain. Said I was paranoid, that I didn't understand how stressful her work was, how she was under so much pressure to deliver results. She claimed Jason was just a colleague helping her with some data analysis, that their meetings were strictly professional, and that I was overreacting because I was insecure. I wanted to believe her, but the evidence was right there in front of me. The messages, the recordings, the altered data. It was all too clear. I felt a storm of emotions: anger, disappointment, betrayal. How could she lie so convincingly? She always had a quick comeback, a way of turning things around on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been lying to everyone, not just me. Our entire marriage felt like a lie. And the worst part, the knowledge that her actions could potentially mess up our kids' future health, all for her affair and her need for control. I didn't want to be the guy who just walked away without a fight, but I also knew I couldn't stay in this situation. I told her I needed some space to think, to process everything. I left the house for a few days, staying at a friend's place. During that time, I sifted through everything I'd uncovered. I spoke with a couple of friends I trusted, men who had been through similar betrayals, and got their advice. Some told me to cut her out completely. Others said to try and work it out if I still loved her. But I knew deep down this wasn't just about cheating. It was about trust, integrity, and the future of my family. While I was away, I kept thinking about what I wanted to do. I couldn't ignore the fact that she'd manipulated data that directly affected our children's health. That realization made me see her as someone who was willing to risk everything for her own convenience. I also thought about the emotional toll. I'd been betrayed in the worst way, and I was exhausted. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that haunted me day and night. I thought about confronting her again, but I also knew I had to be smart about my next steps. I was angry, yes, but I also had to be strategic. When I finally went back home, everything felt different. The house was empty of the warmth it once had. I knew I couldn't go on pretending things were fine. I sat her down again, and this time I told her I couldn't do this anymore. I told her I knew what she'd done and I couldn't trust her again, not with our marriage, not with our kids. She looked at me with that icy, bitchy look she always had when she was cornered. She denied everything again, but I had the proof. I told her I was done with the lies and the manipulation. I said she could go her own way, but I was done being a part of it. That moment was like the final nail in the coffin. I felt a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief that I finally faced the truth, and heartbreak because I loved her, or at least I thought I did. But I knew I had to protect my kids and myself. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything we worked for, not over some affair and some messed up research. I realized I'd been holding on to a false hope, and now I had to rebuild my life from scratch. It hurt, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I knew what I had to do now. The following weeks were a blur of legal consultations, emotional turmoil, and trying to piece my life back together. I filed for separation, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed clarity and space to think clearly. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. My trust was shattered, and I couldn't stand the thought of her continuing to manipulate data and lie about her work, especially knowing how it could impact our children's future health. Lisa, of course, acted like I was overreacting. She called me every name in the book, saying I was overly dramatic, jealous, possessive, and that I was ruining her career and our family by accusing her of such terrible things. She insisted she'd done nothing wrong, that she was just trying to help, and that I didn't understand the pressure she was under. But I didn't want to hear it anymore. I saw through her lies and her manipulations. To her, it was all about saving her reputation or her career. She didn't seem to grasp how much she'd already destroyed the trust I had in her. The hardest part was facing the reality that she wasn't just cheating. I was realizing she'd compromised our family's future. I couldn't ignore the fact that she had tampered with scientific data, possibly delaying treatment for our kids or even putting them at risk. That realization made me feel sick to my stomach. I started to question everything I'd believed about her, about us, and about what the truth actually was. In the midst of the chaos, I decided to take a step back and focus on what mattered most, our children. I hired a forensic expert to look into the research data. He confirmed my worst fears, that some of the results had indeed been altered and that the timeline of the research had been manipulated. It was criminal, really. Someone had been completely reckless with people's lives, and she was at the center of it. I couldn't stay quiet. I knew I had to act, not just for justice, but to protect my family from further harm. I started collecting all the evidence I could find, emails, lab reports, messages, and prepared for a serious confrontation. I didn't want to do this with anger, but I couldn't help feeling furious that she'd betrayed everything I believed in. Our marriage, our family, the future of our children, all thrown into chaos because she couldn't resist her affair with Jason or her desire to manipulate her research. I knew I couldn't trust her anymore. She lied repeatedly, and her excuses didn't hold up once I saw the full picture. One night, I sat her down and laid everything out, my findings, the evidence of her affair, her manipulation of the data. I told her I was done pretending, done trusting, done accepting her lies. I told her she needed to be honest with herself and with me about what she'd done, and that I wasn't going to stay in a marriage built on deception. Her face twisted with anger, but I saw the guilt behind her eyes. She knew she was caught, but she refused to admit it outright. Instead, she started to lash out, calling me controlling and accusing me of ruining her career. It was a breaking point for me. I realized I'd been holding on to hope that she'd change, that she was still the woman I'd fallen in love with. But that woman was gone. She'd become someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of lying, cheating, and risking our kids' future for her own convenience. I knew I had to move forward, even if it meant ending everything we'd built. It was a painful choice, but I couldn't stay in a lie anymore. I had to protect my children, my sanity, and what little integrity I had left. The final straw came when I confronted her with the full extent of what I'd uncovered. I showed her the evidence, altered lab results, the timeline manipulations, her messages with Jason, everything. Her face went stiff, and for a moment I thought she might break down. But instead she looked at me with this cold, bitchy expression, like she was already planning her next move, like she thought she could just talk her way out of it again. I reached my limit. I told her straight up that I was done with the lies, the betrayal, the manipulation. I told her she had jeopardized everything, not just our marriage but the future of our children. I explained that I couldn't trust her anymore, that I didn't want her anywhere near our kids if she was willing to risk their health like this. I told her she needed to leave, that I was filing for divorce, and that I never wanted to see her again unless she was honest and willing to make some serious changes. She screamed, called me controlling and selfish, said I was overreacting and ruining her career. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was exhausted. I knew I had to do what was best for me and for my children, even if it hurt like hell. The betrayal cut so deep I didn't think I'd ever fully recover from it. But I also knew I couldn't stay in this toxic, dishonest marriage. I had to walk away, even if it left me broken. In the end, I filed for divorce. I moved out, took full custody of the kids, and started the long process of healing. It's been a tough journey, anger, sadness, regret, and a lot of questions. But I also learned some hard truths about trust, about the danger of lies, and about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it hurts. Looking back, I realize I was naive for so long. I trusted her because I loved her, but love isn't enough when betrayal runs so deep. My biggest lesson is that honesty is everything, and when someone's willing to lie and cheat, they're also willing to risk everything. Sometimes, even the lives they're supposed to protect. I hope my story serves as a warning. Don't ignore the signs, don't let love blind you, and never underestimate the damage a lie can do. I've started rebuilding my life, focusing on my children and learning to forgive myself for trusting her in the first place. Life goes on, and I've realized that sometimes the only way forward is through the pain. Trust your instincts, hold onto your integrity, and never let anyone sacrifice your future or your family's just for their own selfish needs. That's what I've learned from the worst betrayal I've ever experienced.